Okay, let's do it, shall we? Good morning, everybody. My name is Stephen Ma. I'm the Chief Purpose Officer here at Nomos, and I am your presenter today during this series of webinars that we've got all about the future of work, particularly around distributed ideas, agile mindsets, and lots of pro tips that we hope to be practical things you can take away to put into day-to-day work now that we're all distributed and beyond. So today's topic is how to be better than face-to-face. All the implications for individuals, for teams working in everything from startups through to some of the world's largest enterprises, through to the enterprises themselves. What does it mean to be mature? What does it mean to be good, effective, competitive indeed at distributed work? And here today we're going to articulate 5 stages and present to you a feeling of what that looks like and some practical things that you, your teams, or your organizations can do to move up this maturity curve. Our second topic is to talk about asynchronism, this idea that not everyone needs to work at the same time, and we'll make a case for why that's a really good idea. I'll tell you a little true story, actually. I was going to say it's a parable, a true story about 2 hospitals. One, the Dan Pink, author of a number of books, most recently one called When, about the scientific secrets of timing. He calls this hospital the hospital of doom. So we'll look at it as a case study. We'll talk about how we can improve it and what organizations can do to learn from that case study, particularly with respect to people's timing and their asynchronism. Last but not least, we'll go into a bit of a discussion around what does that mean for our personal work-life balance? What does that mean for us being a champion of better and more effective ways of distributed work? Because if we want to make a change in the world, if we want to change and influence our teams and our organizations, all that change has got to start from ourselves. So I hope to equip you with the tools to make that change yourself and be your own asynchronous distributed team superhero. Okie dokie, let's do it. Better than face-to-face, the future of distributed teams. So this is Nomos's thinking around the maturity of distributed teams. We've probably worked with 12 companies since this whole COVID crisis happened, with the luxury of still having quite a thriving opportunity to help everything from startups to large global organizations with their distributed work. And we've seen some patterns around how management and the organization itself has reacted to that. And I present to you these ideas in kind of 5 stages, including some analysis on ourselves about what the maturity looks like and where these things are going. So the first and most obvious stage when we're talking about distributed teams is denial, right? Like the organization is like, hey, you know, this thing's going to blow over. So if we just don't do anything, we just lay low for a little bit, we'll survive, right? It's not forever. We don't have to do anything. Just work from home while you can. That kind of statement, that kind of leadership, and you know, it is a kind of leadership, right? Is one that we characterize as denial. You won't become more effective than you were previously. You're barely equivalent. You're definitely, from a productivity standpoint, going to suffer the inevitable outcome for some period of time. Management has basically made a decision that they're not going to do anything different or special as a result of the crisis that's happening. Therefore, the organization is going to take a hit, and the bet, of course. And I'm not saying in any way that it's a bad hit. So I'm not saying in any way saying it's a bad decision, but either way, the organization's made a decision that's going to take a hit for a little while to just like deny it. It could also be the organization doesn't have a choice for whatever legal reasons. For example, governments dictating to, say, a retailer that they have to close down. You can't really do anything about that. So you're not really going to reformat your retail staff to be a distributed team. You just shut up shop. Okay, so let's say that you are part of the lucky few organizations that stayed open during this time. And you start thinking about, okay, well, okay, if we might be here for a week, we might be here for a month, we might be here for a year, who knows, right? Let's do some stuff. And that stuff inevitably is tactical stuff. And I'm going to compare and contrast with that with organizations that take a more strategic view about this. So probably some of that stuff involved, you know, surveying, doing kind of like bare minimum things, surveying what your employee desk looks like, taking a snapshot of it, making sure your HNS is okay, and then, you know, making sure people have got the equipment, maybe setting up a Zoom so that people can talk to each other. Those are the kind of activities that are very characteristic of organizations that made tactical allowances, right? And again, the leadership intent there was we're going to make a tweak to help make it so that we're not broken. At least we're not denying that something is happening, or we're not shutting down. But, you know, the sense is there isn't a sense of permanence. At some point in time, in management and the organizational designer's head, they're going to go back, the organization is going to go back to the way that things were, and you'll resume business as usual. All of this is a blip. So why make a significant investment in there? And again, I'm not judging the quality to this decision. I'm simply comparing and contrasting it as a maturity framework about how an organization can think more transcendently about what it means to be distributed in terms of teams. Okay, let's talk about aiming to recreate the office. So to actually recreate your office, you have to do significantly way more things than just tactical allowances. You have to work out, okay, well, what do boardroom meetings look like now? How do people have one-on-one corridor chats? How do we even replace the whiteboard that used to just hang out in the room together? So organizations that are thinking about this, and when Nomos started, thanks to our wonderful COO, we were kind of already thinking about this stuff. You end up buying like a lot of tools. You buy things like Mural, which is, and I'm not endorsing any of these tools, but it's an example. Mural.io is a replacement whiteboard tool that allows 10 or 20 or 50 people to draw on the whiteboard at the same time. And that starts requiring a bit of at least a bit of a skills change for people as they learn how to use that tool. If you've been some of the lucky people that were already investing in things like Jira or Trello or visualizations of your work, then you probably leaned into that even more because you're using that to replace the post-it notes that you had on your wall or the other things that you made as part of the face-to-face visualizations. If, like Nomos, you were particularly culturally inclined, you're trying to do things to recreate the water cooler conversations. So some examples of things that Nomos did and some things that we see in other organizations do is like hangout times. Everybody comes together on a Friday, maybe it's 4:30, maybe we'll break out a few beers, maybe we play some computer games. Those are the kind of things that help you replace some of the social aspects and recreate the office. So you can see that the stage that an organization can get at, the recreation of the office, is strategic. There's a substantive investment in tooling, in teaming, in time to allow people to have mechanisms, interactions, etc., that are way more than tactical and could be permanent. They could be permanent if you wanted to run a long-term distributed workforce. You need to be at a minimum at this phase to even consider getting rid of your fixed office space. And of course, some organizations, like some of our wonderful clients over in New York, are telling us, well, given the housing situation in New York, we're always kind of semi-distributed anyway. So, we're just going to lean more into that. And we're having conversations now about never really needing to go back to the office. And they're in that really, really lucky position where, because they've got a more distributed team maturity, strategically from a management, from a cost standpoint, they can make those kind of calls and say, hey, can we reduce the bottom line cost of there being an office? Okay, but inevitably, even if we did recreate the office, and if you're part of the wonderful smaller set of organizations, single digit probably, organizations that have started doing this, you'll know that despite using Mural for a replacement whiteboard, despite using Fun Retro to do your retrospective interactions, despite having drop-in times, you might have recreated the office. But if you're talking pound for pound, hour for hour, productivity point to productivity point, you're still not as productive as you were before. You might have recreated the office, but the vagaries of you not being together, of not having face-to-face chats, the limited bandwidth between two people speaking to each other has just constrained you from being equivalent. So what can distributed teams do in order to be just as productive as before they became distributed, when they were face-to-face? So in order to do that, any good strategist will tell you, play to your strengths. Play to your strengths. If you're trying to be an effective organization, you've got to look at what's now strong about the organization. What's the reality of the context that we exist in? So that takes us to the next phase. To actually be equivalent in terms of pound for pound productivity, you have to do things that are investing in culture. People have to assume more or less this is gonna be a forever thing. They have to start thinking, okay, well, what does that really mean? They have to change themselves, not just learning the tools, which they definitely have to do, but also accepting that certain things are now facts of life if they want to go down that path. Simple things include things like childcare, understanding. I'm sure many of us, me included, have children running underfoot here and there because of this. What does it mean to be a worker, to still do your 7.68 hours a day in the office place, in your virtual office place with children around? That probably, as any parent will tell you, means being able to lean into your flexible work. When your child goes to sleep, you do a few extra hours here. Before your child wakes up, you've got an email over here. Maybe you're doing these kind of things that mean that you're not always telepresently there. You know, if your company checks you on your Slack or your whatever, that green light to say that you're at your keyboard is not always there. So that means that this kind of change is both a tangible change. People are working different hours at different times, accepting that they need to worry about things like childcare and, I don't know, cooking and doing their groceries and things like that, right? But it also means a cultural change. It means managers finally really having to trust that their employees going to do the right thing. They're going to work those hours. They're not trying to trick the system or anything like that. And the employees, you know, also doing their bit, because it's kind of a two-way street if we're talking about building trust there. It also means sinking and leaning into people, maybe that you've never unleashed before. What I mean by that is, of course, it is an inevitable outcome of the industrial age that we move through, the fact and the idea that we've got electric light bulbs, that we want to work in factories and do shifts together, that this idea that there is a 9 to 5. But there are certainly people who are natural night owls. Their normal working times that they could have it is something like 3 in the morning. And that's normal, natural. Actually, they're, you know, it's human and it works for them. That's a very real thing. And we'll talk more about that later. To be equivalent means actually leaning into those people and embracing them and actually having the opportunity to say, hey, wait a second. If that's true, what implications does it have, assuming that we're an agile team, for example, of when our daily scrum is? Can we even do one? What implications might it have for our help desk? Could we consider running a 24/7 one, or at least one at odd hours where maybe we've got a lower bandwidth during the evenings because we actually have staff that prefer to work that time? It does mean then you've got to change what the metrics that you use, the organization design that you use, even the team design that you use. So to be equivalent, it sounds cool, right? Like, oh, we can have distributed organizations, teams all over the place, but it actually requires a substantive investment, particularly from a cultural standpoint. And if you're thinking, Steve, tell me the one bottom line difference between equivalent and recreating the office, we are talking about the people, their expectations, their practices, and their culture. Okay, so you're probably thinking, cool, what's this pinnacle one? So the pinnacle one is this transcendent idea. Actually, no one's quite there yet, because who can really point to a truly transcendent organization, right? An organization that is so good at being distributed, right? Even though once it was a white collar office place where everyone was together, but they've gone super transcendent and they've gone out there and distributed their entire workforce. And they've made these investments in culture so deeply, so resonantly, that they look nothing like, once they're transcended, what they used to be. Right? And there's no one pathway here. It's got to be the right thing for the right organization. But that could mean very different things. That could mean, I don't know, flex workforces where there are teams that take tickets in one way and distribute it to a set of people who do the work. That could mean, 24/7 workplaces where people hand the work over to each other in 2 to 3 shifts that follow the sun. That could mean never having set office hours nor set meetings again, and simply accepting that fact that you've got a pool of people that you can draw from that work in ever emerging teams. So the stories are yet to be told in this transcendent area, but if you've got some, I'm kind of really eager to hear from you. So there it is. Distributed teams as a model for thinking about how effective your organization has embraced the distributed ways of working. They can be in a denial stage. They can be in a tactical stage. I encourage you to work as an individual in your teams, in your organization, to at least minimum think about recreating the office, which will give you a lot of productivity boosts. And then assuming that your organization wants to head in this direction, to make the real investments in strategic and cultural shift to at least take you to equivalent level. And then, you know, let's see where we're all at in 6 to 18 months. Maybe we can start telling some stories about organizations that have taken this as a wonderful opportunity to transcend to the next stage. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. I mentioned there in becoming equivalent is going to, at minimum, require you to leverage things like your strengths, like syncing up, leveraging night owls, etc. And that brings me to this really interesting topic that we call asynchronicity. Different people having working mojos, being able to get into their flow at different times of the day. So what am I talking about? Different people, different flow, different times. If you came to some of our previous webinars, you'll know that I'm a super Dan Pink freak. He's an author that does a lot of science and human research about organizations, teams, and productivity. And he kind of presents these findings back in really nice, easy to read ways. His latest book is called When. Again, I'm not endorsing him and I get no benefits out of talking about this. I just really love the guy. Last time we talked about the power of restorative breaks. Actually taking breaks in the middle of an exam helps you get your energy back. And we even talked about the way to take the super optimal break, which is this concept of the nappuccino, where you find your afternoon drop time, you create a really peaceful environment, things like eye masks, things like earplugs, and then drinking coffee just before you take a 25-minute break, giving yourself enough time to really fall asleep, which is about 7 minutes. And then not so that it's too long so that you don't get what's called sleep inertia, where when you wake up, you still feel really groggy. So Dan Pink's got some really, really pro tips in this book, and I strongly recommend it to you. I'm going to tell you a story about asynchronicity from this book now. In this book, we talk about there being two hospitals, a regular hospital and a hospital of doom. In the hospital of doom, some really funky and very, very bad things happen. At the hospital of doom, you're 3 times more likely to receive a potentially fatal dose of anesthesia. You're more likely to die within 48 hours of surgery. More cancerous growths go undetected. Internalists are more likely to prescribe unnecessary antibiotics, and staff are less likely to wash their hands. They're 10% less likely to wash their hands, right? During this kind of hospital. Like, what is this hospital of doom? Please tell me the name of it, Steve, because I never, ever want to go to this hospital. Well, this hospital, compared to baseline hospital A, the hospital of doom is actually the exact same hospital as hospital A. It's just the hospital of doom is the same hospital after 12 o'clock, after 12 noon. After the moment that we started this webinar, that very same hospital becomes 3 times as likely to dose people with a fatal dose of anesthesia, more likely to die within 48 hours of surgery, and they miss cancerous growth. Like, what's happening? Aren't doctors and nurses and medical professionals highly trained, highly paid professionals that should be looking after us at all times of day? You're right. Yes, of course they are. Of course they are. And nothing's different about this hospital other than time. So then it leads us to ask the question, what the heck is it about time, particularly around what time of day it is and how people work, that is causing this damage? And most especially for you and for distributed teams, what can we do about it? So I'm going to give you an exercise. I want you to take something to write with, a piece of paper. Just think about yourself normally. There's 3 questions. The first question is, when you have a normal, natural day, as in you don't have to wake up for an 8 a.m. meeting or something like that, like it's a weekend, and you're not particularly trying to sleep in, it's just like a normal holiday day for you. I'm looking for your normal, natural, carefree kind of rhythm. Write down what time it is that you naturally go to sleep. And then again, on a normal, natural day, you don't have to wake up crazy for an 8 a.m. or something like that, or 6 a.m. or 4 a.m. When do you naturally wake? Write down that time. Okay, so, making it up, if I was 8 p.m. When I went to sleep and I was 4 a.m. waking up, what I want you to do is find the midpoint of those 2 times, right? What's in the middle? Like, what's the middle of your sleep? So for me, if I was going to sleep at 8 p.m. and I was waking up at 4 a.m., my midpoint would be 12 midnight. So yeah, you've got it for your midpoint time. That time is what's called your chronotype. It sets, it says a certain thing about you, about when your peaks and your troughs and your natural highs and your natural lows are. And of course, like most human things, it's not that you're this or you're that. It's really a spectrum. And it turns out this is actually a very well-researched, well-studied phenomenon where there's a normal distribution curve of humans and where they are on these peaks and troughs. So Dan Pink makes a bit of a joke here. Of course, we all know the story about early birds. Early birds get the worms. So he's calling them larks, which are these green characters here. We all know the story about night owls, people who work better at night, represented by this red character here. But actually the majority of humans are in the middle. They're these people called third birds. So if you look at your time, and if your time was somewhere between 1 a.m. to about 3:30 or so, I think it's something like 25% of people in the world, you would be an early bird. You'd be what they call a lark. It probably means that from a emotion standpoint and a mood and hormonal standpoint, you're probably introverted, you're very conscientious, you're agreeable, you're persistent, you're emotionally stable. There's a lot of research to back up that kind of personality type because of your hormonal changes in your natural human interactions day to day in your 9 to 5. If you're a night owl, statistically, there's a lot more, it's not a lot more people, same amount of people, but there's a lot more curve of people that are naturally late sleepers. So actually, Byron, I'd be very interested in your personal exercise here when your midpoint was and where your time was. But there's a lot of people who actually stretch out to 10 a.m. 10 a.m., right? So we're talking about people who naturally go to sleep at 4 a.m. in the morning and naturally wake up at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. That would be what you mean when you say you're a 10 a.m. Midpoint night owl. So for night owls, 25% are solidly night owl types. They're open, they're extroverted, they exhibit the symptoms of neuroticism, they're more impulsive, comparatively speaking. And again, I'm generalizing the entire world's population in 3 categories. So please take this with a bit of a grain of salt. It is still a spectrum and it is a general characteristic of these kinds of groups of people. The research also says that children tend to be larks. If you've got young children, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Of course, people who become older as well also become larks, whereas teenagers often become owls. And you're most owly when you're about 22 or so. And then some people revert back to being larks in the 20s. That totally happened to me as well. I was definitely a bit of a night owl. And then I started doing 4 a.m. wake ups, totally changed my time in my life. Okay, so why am I telling you all of this? Well, this has huge implications for you personally, for your team members that you work with, and for your organization as a whole. If it's true that different people have different times, different energetic times, then what does that mean for how we schedule work, how we organize this hospital of doom? How can we redesign ourselves so that, you know, for example, different doctors who might be more night owly are on the right time so they can even out those peaks and troughs to make the hospital a little less doomy than it was. So the great part is that this is based on some existing research. Dan Pink's pulled it together very usefully for us. So based on your chronotype, whether you're a lark, a third bird, or an owl, there's some pro tips. When do you do analytical thinking, analyzing Excel spreadsheet kind of tasks? There's a good tip for when you should do that. When do you have your trough? When do you have your break in energy? When should you do the nappuccino break? When should you walk your dog, go out for a jog, go to the gym, do certain things like that, where you know, you're basically useless during that time. Don't make any hard decisions during that time. Use it to play with your work-life balance. And then often for most personality types, for most chronotypes, there's a recovery. There's an energy phase where you get different mood, you get different vigilance. You know, some people say they love to write or paint or do their creative thing at midnight. That's the kind of uplift that we're talking about here. So for larks, it's exactly as you expect, right? Early morning analytic tasks, administrative tasks, early to mid-afternoon, and then insight tasks to do late and early in the evening. For third birds, you can go early through to mid-morning to do your analytical task at 11 or 12 o'clock, and then early mid-afternoon, it can basically say it's just staggered by a few hours. Unfortunately for owls, the best time to be interacting with other people still happens to be when other people are also awake. But actually, you can flip some of your insight tasks because you're tired, you're a bit sluggish, you might tend to be a bit more creative during the morning. So if you happen to be a night owl person, you actually can have very, very good creative time early in the morning, whereas you save some of your energetic, do good stuff, very narrow and focused stuff late in the evening. So the owls can do a bit of a flip there, whereas the third bird's just delayed by a little bit. So some pro tips for you specifically. Because we did an exercise just then, hopefully you should know your chronotype. This table should give you a bit of analysis of what to do when. Again, like I said, there's a spectrum. So you're not exactly a third bird or exactly an owl or exactly a lark, but I encourage you to take a little diary of what your mood looks like. There's 100 apps on the iPhone store, on the Android store that you can use for this. just, update them, see what your mood is at any given time, and see whether you feel like your peak energy, see whether you feel down, see whether you feel tired. If you take a diary about a week or 2 weeks, and during this crisis time where we're all working from home, is the perfect time for you to be doing this to yourself. You get a little map of when your high energy, low energy times are. And then you can become at the luxury of designing some of your interactions, some of your work periods, some of your rest periods around that, which definitely means that you might not end up working, you definitely won't end up working the pure 9 to 5. Hopefully you're still giving your organization your 7, your 8 hours, but actually you're giving them those 7 or 8 hours in a highly productive way because you've hacked yourself for the best time during the day to work. And honestly, like I've started doing that. And in fact, I was doing that before this whole crisis. You find your energy pays off. You find your family relationships better. You find you have time to exercise. Gosh, there's so many things change as a result of just doing that little bit of analysis. Like I said, it allows you to demarcate appropriate work and rest periods. These days, I do that Nappuccino quite religiously. So I have this little timer next to me where I'll do like kind of long Pomodoros, 53 minutes or so. I'll take 17 to 25-minute breaks. My wife actually knows when this thing goes off, we can like go out for a coffee or go for a cuddle or something like that. It's honestly, it's been really great for me to adopt these pro tips at home to demarcate my work and rest periods too. Of course, you're thinking, Steve, that's super naive. I'm not 100% control of my time. I'm not the big boss. I'm not the CEO of my company, so I can't do whatever I like. And it's kind of scary, right? Like if I start doing that, my boss is going to be like, hey, why are you off at these times? Like, I know, and I'm not saying that those are easy challenges to solve. That's definitely not the focus of my webinar, for you to be the champion of how to change all these things. But I will say this to you. If you do want something to change, of course, the change has to start from yourself. Have the conversations in the way that is appropriate with yourself, with your manager, with your teams, to say, hey, I'm actually trying this thing out. Teach them. Maybe when we've got all the slides from this webinar too. If you like, I can come and talk to them to help them out to make this change. It's a very good thing to experiment together as a team to see what it does for your productivity and does for your organization. And you might find, if you thought that our maturity model for distributed teams is really compelling, like you want some help to energetically move your organization along that curve, you could start by doing it to yourself, and certainly you don't always need our help. But if you'd like to, reach out to us at any time. We'd be happy to help you out with having a conversation with your organization, talking to your boss about it, presenting this webinar to them to kind of spark that change. So yeah, otherwise, go forth and do it yourself. I strongly encourage you to do that if you feel comfortable with it. Okay, so here it is again, the distributed team's maturity. We're talking specifically about going beyond recreating the office, making equivalent and eventually transcendent teams. One of the key ways to do this is asynchronicity, leading into the different powers of different people with different times to help you avoid the hospital of doom situation by staggering when people work. It does mean that you're breaking out the 9 to 5, you're working at different times with different rest periods, but it does mean that you need to do it together. You need to set some expectations around it. You need to trial and measure yourself to understand how to be most effective. And last but not least, we can certainly help you with that if you're a bit nervous about it. Okay, I'm going to throw it over to you guys now. So if you've got a microphone on, feel free to turn it on and have a bit of a conversation with me. Now that we've learned about this, I'd like you to have a bit of a think about it. What's one thing that you can do for yourself from any of the tips that we learned today, whether it was the maturity curve, whether it was about asynchronicity, whether it was about taking command of some of your work-life balance and having some of the conversations with the team? What are you going to start doing? What's one thing you start doing, or maybe you do differently, or maybe you're already doing it, but you're going to do it better now that you learned this research, up to and including reading that Dan Pink book, or something that you do less of as a result of learning all of this. So feel free to turn on your microphone if you want to tell me about it. Feel free to type in the chat if you've got an idea. So love to hear from you guys. What are you going to do differently now that we've learned something about this? I will say that there's many, if you're talking about changing yourself and changing your organization, there's many angles that you can take for it. And we've both been talking about our personal angle, right? And that's already going to change your life. You're the only people that need to give us permission to change our own lives is us, right? So first step, right? I work with my leadership team. They said, okay, we're going to have meeting-free Wednesdays. So I don't know how transformative that was, Paul, but totally changed my life. I don't know how it changed totally changed his life too. I started taking out 9 a.m. to 10:10 to be my, Stephen's no meeting time. Don't talk to me during this time. I'm still doing work stuff, but like, don't talk to me. I'm just going to check my emails and make sure I'm in the right mental headspace. It really helped me. Showing this will often work at team lead level because we're talking about using it at team lead, and you're an agile coach. You can use things like retrospectives with your own team to go, hey guys, I've been on this personal journey. I've been trying this. It's worked really well. Just want to suggest to you guys, do you want to try it out? I share with you some bonus material. I'm looking through my Harvard Business Review archives, and it's a very timely article coming in May, June 2019. So last year, they looked very prescient for doing it, where they did some analysis on organizations that did it tough during the different recessions in world history, whether it's the Great Depression, the 80s stock market crash, the 90s one, the Asian financial crisis, the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, etc. And they studied 4,500 organizations in those periods and what happened to them during that time. 17% of them during those recessions went bankrupt. And those bankrupt organizations were characterized by this kind of denial and tactical allowances. They feared, they locked things down, they laid off staff, they did all these kind of reactionary fear things. But the funny thing that came from their study is that 9% of the organizations, aside from the 17, they didn't just survive. In coming years, they thrived. They outcompeted their competitors. In fact, they exceeded them by 10%, both in overall share growth and by net revenue year on year compared to their competitors. So there's this kind of like small set of 9% of organizations that outpace their competitors post-recession. The question is, how the heck did they do it? And this Harvard Business Review article, this way before COVID, right, says actually some of it reinforces old adages about this is how you run a really good company, change management exercises, communicate with your staff. And some of it is really surprising things. And if you read through the article, it basically gives you pro tips on what we call modern agility practices, investing in your people, investing in your culture, investing in your teams. So thinking about that, we're talking about an age now where people are separated from each other. How do we invest in that? I certainly think, if I don't have a crystal ball, but if I based everything that we know from 4,500 organizations, studies by McKinsey and Bain and Harvard Business Review to talk about these organizations, I strongly urge leaders of organizations to make that investment at that level, to do a high pressure exercise in change management towards investing in their people, in their culture, exactly in the ways that this model indicates, to help them transform and outcompete people in the future. Because the organizations right now that are having conversations about getting rid of their office place, about making their organizations even more effective working remotely than they ever were face-to-face, those are the ones for whom the future belongs to. But certainly, if there's one takeaway that you can take away from this, is most organizations worry about like what the right skill set is, right seniority, right, I don't know, culture, gender, personality mix. All I'm doing is articulating that there's probably one more thing for teams to consider, which is the chronotype mix, and making sure that we're aware of it so that we can have conversations about it, so that we can set appropriate times for appropriate things to help understand each other better. Okay, you've been an absolutely wonderful audience. I promise that we'd finish on time. We're coming up on five minutes early. So you've been absolutely wonderful. I get the sense that it was very useful to you. That's everything I've got to present. If people want to hang out and have some questions afterwards, I've got 5 minutes. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Hope to see you soon in 3 weeks' time for our next session.